Hello readers, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Haley, and today I am sharing my October wrap-up and my November TBR. So the last time we met, I went on a fly fishing trip with my family, which was a bookish vacation for me, and I read 2 out of the 5 books that I packed in that TBR, which I'm very proud of. I have 3 kids. They are now 5, 2, and 6 months old, so the fact that I read 2 whole books on a vacation is a win for me. But it was so much fun. It was a beautiful small little town in Mammoth Springs, Arkansas. The creek was wonderful, the fall leaves were beautiful, and it was the perfect cozy end to fall before the holiday season. So let's dive right into my October wrap-up. The first book I finished in October was With This Pledge by Tamera Alexander. This is the book that we read for our ladies book club at church, and we loved it. This is a Christian historical fiction romance based off of real people during the Civil War. It takes place in Carton. This book is the first in Tamera Alexander's Carton series, and that is a house in Franklin, Tennessee. And when the Battle of Franklin happened and the South lost, devastatingly so, all of those wounded and dying soldiers were taken to the Carton house in order to be cared for. And Clarkson, our main character, is a governess at Carton who helps tend to the wounded soldiers and happens to fall in love with one as well. One of the best things about this book was how well researched it was. You can really tell that she did her homework and she made you feel like you were there. The amount of faith woven through this story that you see not only through our main character Lizzie, but also her love interest, Captain Jones, as well as all of the soldiers who were wounded and dying, and the doctors who tended them, and the house owners of Carton. It just really blew my mind, because you don't think so much about the emotional side of the Civil War. Whenever you grow up in a public school setting, you kind of just think about the facts, but there's something about a story that brings it to life, and this was gut-wrenching. I mean, there were even some gory scenes of the battlefield in here that were all so real, and this book kind of takes you to a place where you are seeing the warring points of view from the North and the South, because Captain Jones, the love interest, obviously fought in the war for the South, and he was also a slave owner. But Clarkson, the governess, is far more progressive, and she does not believe in slavery. And so to see them develop a romance in spite of their differences, and to see where God brings Captain Jones throughout this book after losing a leg and after losing the war that he fought for and pretty much losing his complete way of life, to see how God transforms that and transforms his heart on the matter of slavery was absolutely masterful. And I loved also the perspective of the slaves in this story who see the end of the war approaching. They feel like the North is going to win and their life is about to change, and they know that they have some upcoming decisions to make about what they're going to do with their life. And that was a really beautiful part of this story that doesn't really get touched on enough. What I love about Tamera Alexander, because this is the 3rd series that we've read from her, is her ability to do a romance story without the romance being the main point of the story. There are so many other issues at play, and God is leading through absolutely all of them. And I would highly recommend this as a November read, because the Battle of Franklin that happens in this book actually takes place at the end of November. I think it's maybe November 30th. And then this book also carries into Christmas time, and Clarkson reads A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens to all of the wounded soldiers. And I love when authors include classic books in here in their work. And Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen was also mentioned. It was Clarkson's favorite book, and it makes me want to read Sense and Sensibility. So I love when authors include classic works into their own. But I highly recommend this if you're looking for a book pick for November, especially if you love Christian historical fiction. And honestly, even if you don't, because I never did before picking up Tamera Alexander's books, and now I'm sold. So if you're looking for a book to read With This Pledge by Tamera Alexander is one you should definitely pick up for the month of November. The next book I finished for the month of October was Anne's House of Dreams by L.M. Montgomery. This is the 5th book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and in this book, Gilbert and Anne have just gotten married and are now living on the coast in their little house of dreams for their first few years of married life. This is my favorite Anne book so far, and I think it's just because I find Anne so relatable now as a wife, as she has matured in her life. Anne faces her first bit of tragedy in this book, and it broke me. I cried so hard for Anne, and I won't tell you what happens because I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't read it, but to see her walk through that and carry her faith through was wonderful. And something about the Anne books that I love that I don't think gets mentioned near enough is the amount of faith that's in them. God and his providence and his will and his working in their lives is mentioned so much, and I don't think that portion of the Anne of Green Gables series gets talked about nearly enough. But something else I loved about this were the side characters. I have loved all of the side characters in the Anne of Green Gables series. L.M. Montgomery just knows how to write characters in a way that makes them feel real, all of their real quirks and just out there things that they do or say that feel so individualistic that this fictional character feels real. And Captain Jim, who is the lighthouse keeper, he's an old soul that we meet in this book. He is just one of the dearest characters I've ever met. He is so wise and loving, and as he says, is of the race that knows Joseph. And I will forever use that term now instead of kindred spirits. But he was so dear, and reading his story and reading his ending got me so emotional. And then we also meet Miss Cornelia Bryant, which is probably a character who has made me laugh harder than I've ever laughed at any of the characters in the Anne series, even Davy. And Davy is one that really makes me laugh. But she is kind of the town's notorious man hater. She doesn't really hate men, but her famous phrase is, "Isn't that like a man?" And just some of the things she says is so outlandish and out there. And her ending was so fitting, and I won't even tell you what happens because I want you to read it if you haven't got this far in the Anne of Green Gables series, but it was the perfect way for her character's story to be wrapped up. And then we also meet one of the most tragic characters in the Anne series, and that is the character of Leslie, who in every way possible, pretty much since birth, has had tragedy surround her life. And not only that, but she just looks to have this really hopeless future. But there's something about her that just draws Anne to her and her to Anne, and they develop this friendship that almost has a wall up, because for most of Anne's life it's been rosy and golden and wonderful, and for most of Leslie's life it's been fraught with tragedy and horrible things. And then Anne experiences her own tragedy, and the way they connect afterwards is a beautiful rendition, I don't even know if that's the word, a beautiful portrayal of what friendship looks like in adulthood. You mature together, you grow together, you walk through things together, and I just loved it. This has been my favorite Anne book so far, and I cannot wait to hopefully continue the series and wrap it up before 2023 is over. And I even commonplaced 2 quotes from this series that I'm going to share with you as well. So the first quote that I commonplaced in my commonplace book is, "And we mortals all shrink from too close contact with God or devil." And isn't that the truth? The Bible says very clearly that we don't wrestle with the flesh, but we wrestle with the spirit. So much of our world is spiritual. We are spiritual beings, but it seems that whenever we're confronted with that in real life, we don't know how to face it, and it can be a fearful thing. So I think that was a good reminder not to shrink back from the spiritual, especially the good things that God and the Holy Spirit can do for you. So that's one that I added in my commonplace book. And another quote that I added was, he'd quoted poetry so much that he sort of got into the habit of talking it too, I reckon. So this character read so much poetry and quoted so much poetry that he started talking very poetic all the time. And as an aspiring poet, that's something I want to do more of this next year, is read more poetry to the point where I've got it memorized and quoted. This is something that in education used to be done a long time ago that's not done well now. And so that's something I want to work on as I grow my own poetry skills. So the next book I read in October was another one that I took along with us on vacation, and that's The Creative Family Manifesto by Amanda Blake Soule. Amanda Blake Soule is actually a famous blogger that I didn't know about, and I'm glad I didn't know about it until I picked up this book, because it probably would have swayed the way that I read it. Not that it was bad, but this book is not Christian, and I think that's important to say. It's not marketed as a Christian family book, but the majority of books that I read and review are of Christian type. But this one really is just basically a how-to manual, how to have a creative family. This is a book of ideas on what to do, and I even tabbed some that I really enjoyed. One good idea was the idea of parlor games. So instead of having TV time at the end of the day, you play old-fashioned parlor games like they used to do before TVs were available. Things like charades, whatever you do, don't smile, what's in the bag, the endless story, where one person starts a story and then the next person kind of picks up and adds to it, and you go around creating a story together. I thought that sounded so fun. And then another idea I really liked from here was creating with your children's art. So let's say your child draws a picture of something you love. You take that picture and you turn it into an embroidery work for yourself, and then eventually you have this collection of embroidery work that you then turn into a quilt for your child someday of their childhood artwork. Beautiful idea. And this book is full of them. That is what I would call this book, a book of creative ideas that you can start implementing with your family. You know, you can kind of take it or leave it. If you don't like some ideas, don't do them. If some of them sound fun, tab them and do them. Another one that I liked was a nature table for little kids. So instead of having toys, kind of having a table of just things that your kids find and collect from the outdoors. So things like acorns and pine cones and sticks and whatever fun seasonal thing is out there, you create this little nature display that invites them into play inside of the home. And so that's pretty much what this book was through and through, a how-to manual. I love that it was broken up into small sections, because if you don't have a lot of time to sit and read, you would have time to get through this book in small increments. And so I would highly recommend this for anyone who wants to get into more creativity with their family. The only thing that I think this book was lacking was maybe pictures. I would have loved to seen some pictures of examples of some of this work. I just think it would have enhanced it. And then at the end of the day, because this wasn't a Christian book, it was not marketed as such, so that is not a knock against the author. That's a personal preference. But the whole reason that we want to create is because we were created by a creator. She talks so much about how it's innately within all of us to want to create. But I think she did miss the ultimate point, that it's because we're created by a creator. And in fact, one of the very first people mentioned in the Bible being filled with the Spirit of God was filled with the Spirit of God in order to create the tabernacle. As a matter of fact, let me find that quote in the Bible. In Exodus 31:3, it says, "And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts." So Bezalel was filled with the Spirit of God in order to be creative. God's Spirit is creative. The Spirit that lives within us, if you are a believer, is creative. And so I found that this book helped me tap into that. So even if it wasn't Christian, it still got to the point of that and made me want to dive in the idea of faith-filled, spirit-filled creativity. So I have some more books on my list that I'm going to dive into at a later time about that topic. But all in all, I really did like the Creative Family Manifesto, and I would recommend it if you're looking just for some ideas. It got me crocheting, it got me painting more alongside of my daughter. It was a really, really fun read if you're looking to foster creativity in your family. The next book that I read this month was actually one I listened to on audio, and that was The Life-Giving Home by Sally Clarkson. I just love her work. There's something about her words and the way she creates atmosphere in her writing that is so cozy. She's such a good mothering mentor, and I really like listening to her books because I can do so as I'm doing house chores, and it makes me just want to put a lot of extra love and intention into my home. Especially if you like the idea of a moody home. So all of this beautiful art everywhere and Celtic music in the background and candles lit. And it's all just woven together through a heart of faith and a heart that wants to serve and love God. And what I loved most about The Life-Giving Home was that it was broken up into months of the year. So it's one I would get out and reference at the beginning of each month to have something to be intentional about for the month. And I'm going to be working my way through all of Sally's works. That was my husband that just walked by. I'm going to be working my way through all of Sally Clarkson's books within the next year because they're just so good and she is such a mothering mentor. But that's the last book that I finished for the month of October. So now let's get to the good stuff and get into my November TBR. As always, it's very ambitious and it's very unlikely that I'm going to get to all these books, but I am going to try. The very first book is one I packed along vacation but did not get to, and that is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. This is the third book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. If you go by publication order, that's the order in which I'm reading them in, but it's the fifth book if you go by chronological. And basically, you're just meeting back up with Lucy and Edmund and their cousin Eustace in Narnia. I actually already started this one. I'm through chapter 1, so I'm at the very beginning. But I expect to finish this within the next 2 days because I just love this series so much. The next fiction read is another book that I didn't get to this month, but am going to get through in the month of November. And that's Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Something about this just being a family book and a book with siblings in it makes it the perfect book for me to read during the holidays because I think it's a good reminder to foster the importance of family around the holidays. No matter if you have a big family or a small family, we have 3 children, and if no one else is with us on Thanksgiving, it's important that we make it memorable for them. So I'm excited to read this, and I'm hoping that I'm even going to get some inspiration from the mother in this book. So I'm interested to read it as a mother and not as a young girl. The next 2 books I have are books that I think are going to prepare my heart for the Thanksgiving season. So these books are ones that aren't necessarily about Thanksgiving, but they are about meals around the table. The next book I have is A Meal with Jesus by Tim Chester, Discovering Grace, Community, and Mission Around the Table. This is one that our book club is reading, and I'm really excited about it. It says on the back here that the meals of Jesus represent something bigger. They represent a new world, a new kingdom, and a new outlook. Tim Chester brings to light God's purposes in the seemingly ordinary act of sharing a meal. How this everyday experience is really an opportunity for grace, community, and mission. Chester challenges contemporary understandings of hospitality as he urges us to evaluate why and who we invite to our table. Learn how you can foster grace and bless others through the rich fare being served in A Meal with Jesus. And it's so true that so much fellowship happened in the Bible with Jesus around a dinner table. And I think that is very important to remember going into the Thanksgiving season, especially if you're hosting, but even if you're not. Fellowship is very biblical, and it's something that we should all be a little bit more mindful of. The next book on my November TBR that I'm hoping will help prepare my heart for the Thanksgiving season is The Life-Giving Table by Sally Clarkson. I just finished up The Life-Giving Home, so I think this is the perfect next transition in her book series. because it deals with creating a life-giving home around the family dinner table. Once again, it's a book that's going to focus on meal times and what that looks like with not only loved ones, but with those that we invite into our home. So I think it's the perfect book to help me prepare my home and prepare my heart for fellowship, for servanthood, for Thanksgiving, of course. And I just think it'll be another wonderful, cozy read from Sally Clarkson. The next book in my November TBR is Humility by Andrew Murray. This is one that I actually started on audiobook, but I immediately hit pause because it was so good that I didn't want to just listen to it. I wanted to read it. I know this is one that I'm going to want to save a lot of quotes from, but it says, "The deepest humility is the secret of the truest happiness, of a joy that nothing can destroy." And from what I've read or listened to at the beginning of that audiobook, it's essentially the idea that humility is at the heart of not only Jesus himself, but of serving him. Unless we're humble, we can't truly appreciate not only what he has done for us, but what he calls for us to do for others, which is serve. And I think going into the holiday season for Thanksgiving and for Christmas, having a humble heart will truly be a gift that will help me get through the holiday season. So this is the last book that I have on my November TBR. That is a total of at least 4 books to get through. And if for some reason I do happen to get through all of these, I do also want to start the next book in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is The Magician's Nephew. And then if I finish that one, very, very unlikely at this point, but we're always ambitious, I also want to get to Anne of Ingleside, which is the 6th book in the Anne of Green Gables series. So that's all I have for my October wrap-up and my November TBR. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any books that you're reading for the month of November, or if you know of any good books that would be great Thanksgiving reads, please put them down in the comments below. I would so appreciate your recommendations. Happy Thanksgiving!